The Chinese investment into the rest of the world will continue to grow. And ties back to what I earlier said about Chinese demographics. To overcome the demographic decline, one thing China need to do is increasing productivity, which is investing in education of its population, which China is doing, according to their 5-year plan. And a second part is investing abroad. This is what Japan did since the 1960s. Japan invested heavily abroad in parts like Southeast Asia. So now this return on the investment for this early Japanese investment now is going to fund a lot of the retirement back in Japan. And this is another way for China to kind of offset its demographic decline. It's going to invest in places where still a large, young, growing population. So all the labor-intensive manufacturing is going to move there. This is why China is also helping set up infrastructure in Vietnam, in places like Vietnam, because to set up factories, it's not just as simple as dropping off a factory. You need port, you need roads, you need railroads, you need power plants. So China is now investing in setting up infrastructure in places like Vietnam. So in conjunction of moving their more labor-intensive factories over there, this trend will continue to grow, and this will bind the rest of Southeast Asia even tighter with the Chinese economy. Gravitational pull of the Chinese economy into the rest of the world, but particularly in South Asia, is going to continue to grow. And there's nothing that U.S. has in store to compete against that.
That's why I remember someone put a comment for me to answer when I said we won't have the brain power nor the infrastructure to do the chips and all that stuff right here, because we're talking about the factory that's going to be built in Arizona. I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Where is the money for that, first of all? And even if you have the money, where is the brain power? We don't produce engineers, the massive amount that China does. So where are you going to get those employees from?
That was actually the problem they had at the Arizona plant. The TSMC founder, Morris Chang, was complaining about, it's like, we can't find enough engineers to fill the role who are willing to do the job. Have you seen what's happening with Boeing? According to the Al Jazeera investigative report at Boeing plant, many of the people, Boeing workers who worked in the Boeing plant, said, we wouldn't fly those planes. We would not fly those planes, because a lot of people were literally getting high on the job.
This is a Boeing factory in the US state of South Carolina. Workers here in Charleston are assembling the company's flagship product, the 787 Dreamliner. But this footage reveals some have little faith in the plane they build.
Did you fly in one? No. You won't fly in one. Did you fly in one of these planes?
No, not really.
Of 15 workers asked randomly, 10 said they would not fly on the Dreamliner.
I wouldn't fly on one of these planes because I see the quality going down around here.
An employee captured the footage after contacting Al Jazeera to tell us he had serious concerns about what he was seeing. At his request, we changed his voice.
With all the problems reported on the 787, there's 90% that's getting swept away, hushed up. It's an iceberg.
In another meeting, the source told us workers are often underskilled, uncaring, and in some cases on drugs.
I've seen a lot of things that should not go on at an airplane plant. People talking about doing drugs, looking for drugs.
It's all coke and painkillers and you can get weed here. It's really good weed here. They don't drug test nobody.
I know they don't.
And there's people who go out there and want to go smoke one up.
Do they?
Hell yeah.
A lot of the right-wing pundits are blaming everything from conspiracy from China to a diversity hire policy, whatever. But the real problem is cut cornering. U.S. company has been cutting corners for the last decades. This is finally showing up in Boeing. This is like a decades of this corner cutting. It's finally catching up with them. How do you compete? The problem is like competition with China. It could be a healthy competition.
That's true.
China and U.S. before all this trade war stuff, a lot of the Chinese U.S. economy were complementary. For example, even in chips, like you have chips that design using the U.S. software, being that manufactured in Taiwan, then being exported to China. Even when Huawei was first designing its own chips, it was you still have to purchase U.S. software, this chip designing software to do that. But now U.S. is like, okay, we're going to cut off everything. So Huawei is like, okay, we'll have to invent the wheel, no problem. One of the reasons of the U.S. chose semiconductors because they believe, okay, the supply chain of semiconductor is so complex. There's no way China is going to replicate that, because to replicate that would be like replicating the human civilization itself. Well, guess what? If any country that could do it, is China. And China is doing it right now.
Yeah. Well, they did prove it for the space station when we kicked them out of the ISS. They want to hit and build their own. And a lot of us here in the US were saying, oh, there is no way they can do that in such a short time. And they did. It is completed now. Yeah,
and when the ISS International Space Station retire, which happening soon, then the Chinese space station will be the only one that's up there. And then if the U.S. astronaut want to go up to space to do research, they're gonna have to ask permission from China.
Yeah, I wonder if the Chinese will ever. I don't think so. The Chinese will trust the Americans to let them in. So
I think China will be more amenable to invite U.S. astronauts to visit, because that's just good PR. That's just good PR for China, and it shows the contrast between kind of the parochial and narrow-mindedness of Americans versus Chinese. But okay, well, let's go on. Let's go on to the next topic.
We will do that topic soon, Carl. I want to go back to the point of Premier Li Qiang and tie it to what you said about the education aspects and the workforce and so forth. Well, if you guys look, the link that I sent you, if you look at page 17, subparagraph 2, this is where Premier Li Qiang talk about invigorating China through science and education and consolidating the foundation of high quality development. He said, and I quote, "We will make holistic and coordinated effort to strengthen China's education, science and technology, and workforce, integrate planning and policy implementation for innovation, industrial, capital, and talent chains, and deepen comprehensive reform of education, science and technology, and human resources as to create a strong impetus for our modernization drive." End of quote. It's spot on. It really confirmed what you said, Carl, about the strategy that China is going to be doing now moving forward to ensure access to supply chains, markets, building the infrastructure and so forth. And this is why I really wished our government can learn something from the Chinese to session. I'm not saying to replicate the system, to learn from it.
One of the reasons China is like doing a binge build out of its high-speed rail network across the country in the last 2 decades is because the Chinese government planned ahead. They could see right now, while China still have a large, abundant labor pool to devote to construction, this is a golden opportunity to do it while it still can, before the demographic decline sets in. So right now they're racing against the clock to build out the amazing world-class infrastructure. And at the same time, they realize the problem. They realize the problem with the demographic decline, the problem to be tackled. So their solution is to increase productivity of their population through education. Like I said, like the productivity of the younger generation of Chinese people is much, much higher than their parents' generation, just by the simple fact they're much better educated. And you know, they're not, and their options is no longer to, you know, working on construction site, building up high-rise buildings, or assembling iPhone on an assembly line in a factory. Their options is be the next AI engineers working in automated factory, right? And you know, automation is another area where China is adopting on a wide scale, again, to offset the future demographic decline.
Very, very, very interesting. I got a question for you, Carl, and this is again based on the statements issued by Premier Li Qiang that I read. Excuse me. One of them, it says the projection is for China's GDP for next year, 2024, will be about 5%. Do you see that feasible, or is it attainable?
Yeah, I mean, this is already a pretty modest goal. You know, in the past, before the pandemic, you know, from the period from 1980 to like 2020, you know, Chinese economy has been growing on average, you know, like 8
something
9%,
around that.
you know,
Yes.
between 7 to 9%. And back in the 90s and 2000, they were have annual growth rate of like 10, like double digit, like over 10%.
Wow.
But now China is already, you know, depending your accounting method, you know, by PPP, China is already the world's largest economy. You know, but in the U.S. nominal dollar terms, China is the world's second largest economy. When the economy is that big, it's no longer feasible to grow at the same fast rate as before. And I think 5% is a reasonable, modest growth rate. And one of the reasons they want to achieve 5% growth rate is, you know, there's still a lot of, we say the Chinese population is declining, but there's still a lot of the new entrants into the labor market. You know, every year China is still graduating a lot of college graduates who are entering the market force. So they still need to a moderate high growth rate to simply absorb the new labor force that's entering the labor market. So, but I think with what China is currently doing, I think that's quite reasonable, because China is making very fast progress on many fronts, both semiconductors, EVs, AI. We're going to see result of a lot of these Chinese breakthrough very soon, you know, all across the world. You know, Chinese EV is already poised to take over in many parts of the world. It's probably not going to come to U.S. because, you know, U.S.
Oh, the national security threat.
National security threat. And the U.S. currently put 27% tariff on the Chinese EV imports. And because, you know, BYD, the Chinese EV maker, they're making a $10,000 EV car. I mean, this is something Americans actually need, a $10,000 car. But the problem is, you know, U.S. government will never let that happen, because as Elon Musk says, without tariffs, Chinese automakers, EVs, are just going to simply
will take over
their competition.
And I bet you Americans here will be willing to pay for that car, because how many of us can afford $75,000 Tesla? Let alone Elon Musk himself. I'm sure you remember, Carl, when he said that, oh, there is no way the Chinese EV will be a match to Tesla. I remember him saying that.
There's competitors now ramping up, and
Yeah.
as you're familiar with, BYD, which is also on the West Coast, I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10% stake in that. Why do you laugh? BYD is trying to compete. Why do you laugh?
Have you seen their car?
I have seen their cars, yes. In fact, at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, I saw their cars.
Yeah.
Well, they are on a different, tell me why you're laughing. You don't see them at all as a competitor?
No.
Why is that? I mean, they offer a lower price point.
I don't think they have a great product.
Why is that?
I don't think it's particularly attractive. The technology is not very strong. And BYD as a company has pretty severe problems in their home turf in China.
Right.
So I think their focus is, and rightly should be, on making sure they don't die in China.
Well, I mean, back then when he said that, granted,
Yeah.
that was 10 years ago. Back
Yeah.
when Elon Musk was interviewed and said, laugh at the idea
He was
that
laughing,
BYD
yes.
could be a presentation. Back then, because BYD was actually doing a different approach. Because Tesla and Elon Musk, they're trying going for the high end market. They're trying to first go from the ultra luxury market and then move their way down. But BYD was doing a bottom up approach.
Oh.
They're trying to build cheap, affordable cars, and then you try to gradually moving their way up. So 10 years ago, when Elon Musk laughed, he's correct. He was correct at that time that BYD was not his competition, because BYD was aiming
Yeah.
for a totally different market. And also at that time, EV, like the battery technology wasn't quite there. I mean, there's just a lot of hassle about owning an EV. And even when right after Warren Buffett made the investment in BYD after his friend Charlie Munger alerted him to it, I was following the BYD development. Back then, I was like, "Oh, okay, this is a promising company. The BYD, they're already dominant in the battery making business. It's a natural
Yeah.
transition to transition into car making." But then I realized, oh, wait a minute, they actually they're not producing a lot of EVs. They were actually making more gas cars, internal
Yeah.
combustion cars than EV. And on top of that, they had an image problem even in China, because there was a very popular Chinese dating show called Fei Chen Lu Zao, and a lot of the female guests, a lot of the girls who were laughing at BYD being a cheap car. And at that time, I was like, oh man, they have an image problem. They're gonna have an image problem. So at that time, Elon Musk was correct in 2013, 2011, whatever that time frame, to laugh at the idea of BYD as a competition, because BYD did move into the US market shortly after, but they didn't even
After,
try for the car market. They were building out electric buses,
Yeah.
mostly electric buses. They have a plant in Lancaster, California, making electric buses, and so they didn't even try to aim for the car market. But they took their time, building electric buses, building battery to acquire the experience, including building gas cars, ICE cars, to build up the know-how, the experience. And when Tesla moves their production to Shanghai to build a gigafactory, one of the requirements by the Chinese government is that, okay, Tesla, you can before Tesla, China had a requirement of foreign companies, foreign joint ventures with a local Chinese partner to manufacture cars, for example. A lot of the Chinese car industry up to that point were dominated by joint ventures. But Chinese government said, okay, Tesla will make exception for you. You can have 100% directly owned factory in Shanghai. But what we require, and you don't even have to do knowledge transfer like we normally require other foreign companies to. But we do require you have a certain percentage of your components in Tesla made in China. So that way, Tesla had to work with a lot of Chinese local suppliers. And this kind of built up this whole ecosystem of support of building EVs. Now, these same Chinese suppliers who gained their knowledge building parts for Tesla, and now they are turning around and selling their parts to other Chinese EV makers. And so this this is how the Chinese EV makers acquire a lot of the technology and know-how and acquire the supply chain to be where they are right now. And BYD, they really, everything really come together for them in the last few years, just like around the pandemic time. And suddenly they are now making beautifully designed cars because they're hiring like European designers. The top designer for BYD is a German guy, and the other Chinese car maker like Geely, they're doing it by acquisition. They bought out Volvo, and so they're acquiring a lot of the European design expertise, and they bring them in house to train a new generation of Chinese designers. So now BYD just won the top award for electric vehicle in Japan. In Japan, the number 1 and number 3 ranked top electric vehicle in Japan in 2023 are two BYD brand cars. And this is where kind of the traditional car makers in Japan and Germany get caught with their pants down, because they're so invested in the internal combustion engine cars. They have kind of their head in they're like ostrich, head in their sand. They're not ignoring the future, because I believe, especially with the advance of battery technologies, EV is going to be the future. China was also able to do that with a lot of government support, because for example, government has a lot of tax incentives for both the EV manufacturer, including Tesla. Tesla is getting a lot of Chinese subsidies for running their gigafactory in Shanghai. But that extends to all the EV makers, but also to own a EV car. Like right now, to own a internal combustion engine car in Shanghai, it costs you $15,000 to get a license plate. So whereas you don't have to pay for that if you have an EV car. So you get a $15,000 discount right off the bat by owning an EV car in Shanghai, because you don't have to pay $15,000 for a license plate. And so in this many ways, Chinese government really fostered the growth of the EV industry and the EV market in China. And 40% of the new cars sold in China last year were EV. So that's where the future is headed.
That's why the EU now is trying to block the Chinese vehicles from. I read about the European Parliament passing that they're having that conversation now about blocking this, and the US, the National Security Advisor, saying it's going to become a national security issue if the Chinese EV access the market. It's not about that. It's about Americans will be willing to pay 10 grand for an EV from China than paying 75,000 for Tesla. It's the same argument. I made the argument, Carl, regarding the Huawei first iPhone. And at that time, I remember I was still working in Washington, D.C., and I was aware of the talks about all this. That phone was costing $125. The iPhone, Apple, was costing $450. And Apple made the case to the government, no, you can't allow those Huawei phones because of spine issues. It was about the bottom dollar. That's what it was. So the Europeans are doing the same. So,
but it's fine.
Yeah,
it's fine because I think with the way the politics are shaping up in US, both US and EU, they're going to try to protect their own domestic car manufacturers. So they will do their best to block out the Chinese EV. So what I see is, just like Huawei, the adoption of Chinese EV will probably happen more in the global south. So BYD is they're now building factories in Thailand. They're building factory in Indonesia. They're coming to Indonesia to build their factories. Initially, I was skeptical. I'm in Bali. It's like, we don't have charging stations. This is not like China. This is Indonesia. In China, Chinese government built up charging station everywhere, like amazing infrastructure for the EVs. So I'm like, how is this going to work in Indonesia? But right now, what BYD, what they're doing they're building out their own charging stations. When they come to Brazil, they're building out charging stations in Brazil. And they're building up their factories locally to get around the import tariffs. First of all, there will be the BRICS countries. There will be less barriers. I mean, Chinese cars are taking over in Russia right now because European, Japanese, and American cars just basically give it up, right? All the Koreans the Koreans. So now, like, Chinese cars are doing gangbuster sales in Russia. All the new cars are mostly Chinese cars, and I think that's first in the BRICS country and then rest of the global South. I think that's where the Chinese company will make their concerted push for wider adoption.
Wow, very, very interesting.